we did the rates. We brought that in front of you guys in December, I believe. So this is a follow-up with the SDCs. We're not ready to bring the sanitary side to you yet. We still have to work through some stuff for clean water service on the Brooklyn main line. And then we'll probably be bringing that to you here the next couple of months, I would say. So tonight we're going to talk about storm SDCs and rates. We'll bring that back in front of you, and then we'll just look for any direction if you'd like to move forward with the SDC increases or not. So I'll turn it over to you, Deb.
Okay. Can you see?
Yep.
Presentation? Great. Let me start from the beginning here. All right. So I'll start with the SDC update. The current SDCs were put in place in 2016. And at that time when we evaluated, it was based on the master plan and the growth cost per equivalent service unit to determine the local share of the calculated regional SDC. We, based on the capital improvement plan that was in the master plan and the growth share of costs at that time, there was the local SDC equated to the Clean Water Services regional SDC that is intended to be remitted back to the city, but we'll talk more about that later. So we've updated to the capital plan costs, both to reflect inflation, as well as to add some significant projects to the list, specifically water quality and hydromodification facility on planned future streets. And those were significant increases to the capital plan. So when we calculate those numbers, we no longer are within the regional calculated SDC. So there is a basis for having an additional local SDC on top of the regional SDC. And for stormwater, these are calculated on an equivalent service unit basis based on impervious area of a typical home. And it's a system-wide SDC. So unlike the sanitary that has the different geographical surcharges, this is a uniform system-wide. So as with the water SDCs that I presented to council a few months ago, there are three components to the stormwater SDC for the local portion. The reimbursement fee, and that's based on the cost of existing facilities. And you can see in this table that comes out to be $204 per equivalent service unit. The improvement fee then is just over $1,200 when as calculated. And then there's a compliance charge associated with the city's cost to comply with the statutes, about $36 per ESU. The total is $1,462, and that is obviously over and above the regional SDC of $585. The issue, part of the issue here is, with stormwater SDCs, is you've got increasing costs, obviously. So there is an increase in the calculated SDC, but there's also an issue with the policy around credits. And under Oregon statutes, developers who install facilities, capital improvements, are entitled to a credit if up to the improvement fee portion of the SDC, if it's above and beyond cost to meet the development specific needs. So, and in the case of Clean Water Services, their credit policy provides for 100% credit against the SDC in total for meeting development standards. So basically, there are very few instances, my understanding, that SDCs actually get charged and there is revenue back to the city. So part of the recommendation here and these numbers as shown in the table is that the credit be only for a portion of the SDC, and that would be the water quality portion at 45%. And that it only applied to the improvement fee and not the reimbursement fee or the compliance fee, because those aren't impacted by those, and that's consistent with state law. So the net SDC is estimated to be $913 per ESU. That this chart just gives you a comparison of where the SDC
Deb, could I
would
ask
be.
a quick question? Could I ask
Yes.
a quick question?
Sure.
If you go back to that previous slide.
You bet.
So, and if I have this all wrong, feel free to tell me. But I was thinking about the chargeback you were talking about, or the credit. So like if you're doing a development and they do one large swale for the whole development, that's kind of one mode, you know, to handle the clean water, the stormwater portion. We're seeing other modes like in Wilsonville where they're putting very small swales on the individual lots. And in some cases we're seeing where the swales are in the sidewalk planter strips, if that makes sense, you know, where they dig out that instead of planting trees, it's all a swale. Does that change how those credits work? Like if it's on the street side and it's in the sidewalk portion, is the city already paying for that through other SDC credits? You see where I'm going with that? I'm just wondering how that applies in those different modes.
And I am not, you know, Craig or Rich, you know, jump in here. I think that, you know, generally speaking, the way Clean Water Services is applying the credit policy is if you meet the development standards, whatever those are for your particular development, and that could be any kind of, you know, there are a number of different practices, development practices, I think, that would meet that standard, then there's 100% credit. And in this case, we're saying for the city's portion of the SDC that there would still be some credit for the water quality portion, but not for the water quantity portion. And that there are still, that development is still impacting the system. And so a portion of the SDC would be charged.
Anything to add? Everything as far as getting credit back, typically SDC charges for subdivisions are easy to deal with. Light industrial, they're big units. The smaller individual lots still follow the same rule if their impervious surface area over 1,000 square feet is impacted. In which case, we give them the same type of treatment because there's nothing in the Clean Water Services rules that have modified that requirement. So if they provide water quality treatment on site, they get 45%. The 55% rule for detention is basically if they treat it on site, let's say through a planter strip or a rain garden, and they discharge it to their own property, not to the street through a weed pole or anything else, they'll get 100% because basically the detention requirement is that they are not impacting the off-site downstream side of this. So basically they're discharging to their site and it's infiltrating into the soil. Hopefully there's enough room for them to do that. The soil is appropriate for that. If not, then they don't get that credit back for the quantity side. We basically withhold that.
But most people are getting full credit.
But most people, most of the projects that we have right now are getting full credit at 100%. The rationale between what would be us and Clean Water Services on the other side of this comes up from the concept of detaining, but now there's hydromodification, which is basically a downstream impact. There's
Right.
to a stream corridor, which is a natural corridor. Typically, you're doing things off-site, you say, okay, reimbursement for all that stuff. If it was sanitary, it's for sanitary lines that were built and you're dumping into those pre-existing sewer lines. Well, here you don't have that. You've got a stream corridor, it's natural, but there's nothing there. However, in the future, Public Works is going to have to deal with maintenance of that somehow. There's going to be some issues with it. So
That's why the recommendation is to retain that 55% reimbursement segment, because that will help us deal with issues that aren't covered by the rules, but we know that they're going to be there because of the regulations that are coming into effect.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes a lot of sense.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. I was trying to understand how those money flowed in those different kind of form factors. So I appreciate that.
Okay. This chart just gives you an idea of, where the SDC with and without credit under this revised kind of credit assumption, and where Sherwood would fall, which is kind of in the middle here with the credit. And again, most people are going to be qualified for at least some credit. So the second part of this is the rates, and we talked to council about this a few months ago, and so we've updated the rate forecast, again, including the most current capital improvement plan, as well as now factoring in some revenue projection from systems development charges should this proposed SDC and credit policy go forward. As a reminder, the current stormwater rates do provide funding for both operation and maintenance and capital improvements. And capital improvement funding currently, the capacity within the rates is about $750,000 and goes to fund things like road-related capital improvements, equipment and vehicle replacement, as well as the CIP projects. The 10-year projection, as best we can at this point, is about $11.3 million. The SDC funding assumes implementation, as I said, of a new local SDC. And you can see that second line of SDCs and the fee in lieu, which is sometimes associated with remitted back to the city from Clean Water Services, about $700,000. Obviously, it's very hard to predict SDC revenue just based on the timing of growth alone, and then layer in the credit and how that will ultimately be applied. But our best estimate at this point in time is $500,000 to $700,000 potentially in SDC revenue that would now be available to fund some of these projects. The operating transfers to fund the remaining would need to average a little over $800,000 per year to fund the CIP as currently projected here. So this chart shows you both the timing of the SDC expenditures, and by type, the blue is kind of general water quality, swales, catch basins, all of that sort of thing. The red bar is the road-related CIP, and then some other miscellaneous kind of reimbursements back for engineering and other expenses. The green is the projected public works facility, which is out right now in this forecast in the last 5 years. So the with an assumed continued transfer of rate revenue from the operating fund, you can see that initially there's some drawdown of capital reserves, and then in the middle of the plan here, where the expenditures are estimated to be less than those transfers, then the reserves climb again on the turquoise line at the top. And then to enable when that public works facility is actually constructed, then obviously drawing down those reserves again. The whole reason to have reserves obviously is to allow for flexibility, and when there are these large improvements, and then hopefully in years where those improvements are less, then you're adding back to your reserves. We showed the lower line is what would be projected without SDC revenue in the mix. So it definitely should make a difference, should being based on the what actually happens with growth and the credits funded for the developers. So that's the projection on the capital side, and that will require, as I said, an increase in the CIP transfers from the operating fund, which generally the 2% per year increase can meet based on the projected O&M and other capital outlay and equipment projections. But it does, in some years, you can see that the bars are higher than the line being the projected rate revenue, and there is some drawdown of fund balance that's anticipated associated with those assumptions. And again, this is staying with the 2% increase across the board. In this case, a portion of the rate is set by Clean Water Services, so the total increases in the rates may vary. So it's going to be important to continue to monitor, and based on how they set their rates and your growth rate and all of those things, continue to monitor to make sure that the revenues are keeping pace with the expenses. And this just gives you the combined.
Hi, Deb. I have another question for you.
Sure.
On that last slide.
Yeah.
So in fiscal year 2022, it looks like we transferred about, what is that, 400,000?
Yeah, it actually, I believe in the current year that there is, so the way I've set this up in future years is that you transfer over funds from the operating fund to the capital fund. I believe in 2022, there's actually budgeted rate revenue in the fund as opposed to a transfer. It functions the same way, but if I recall correctly, that was the case for 2022.
And this might be a question for staff. We won't have to deal with it in the meeting now, but I would like to kind of understand what those transfers out of the general fund have looked like historically compared to what we're looking at going forward.
Okay, so this is the combined, when we look at operating and capital reserve combined. And as we did when we talked about water, provided at the bottom kind of a low and an upper range of what a minimum reserve level would be. And so based on the assumptions, as best we can predict the future of costs and revenues, it appears that the 2% with the additional SDC revenue and the capital improvements as identified would keep pace. You know, there is some drawdown of reserves overall, but it still would exceed a minimum required or prudent reserve level. And hopefully, if Clean Water Services increases its rates beyond 2%, then that would provide some additional funding for reserves. This is the stormwater bill chart. Shows the $17.49 combined typical bill per equivalent service unit. So just to summarize, implementation of local SDC is recommended at this time, with some modification to your credit policy to help support the capital projects and maintain the reserves. And the 2% per year rate increase is needed to keep pace with those operating costs and support the capital that's not growth related that the SDCs can't fund. And just be important to continue to review and adjust as needed as we go forward. Okay.
Questions?
so we don't look too bad.
And this fund, we look all right. Certainly at some point, it doesn't look like we have to, but we certainly have the option of doing something different rate increase wise if things change with commercial, industrial, government, non-residential services. Do we, Josh, or do we know if we pass the resolution that just says we're going to plan the 2% in the budget, that's just a given, so there's no hesitation. It's like, yep, it's 2% every year is the way it is.
City Council did previously pass a resolution to automatically increase certain fees every year. Not every fee was in that category, but there was a resolution that did set that in place for certain fees.
So can we just double check and make sure that this one's covered?
Yeah.
Yep.
I like the strategy. I like the plan. Other thoughts?
Well, just the automatic increasing. I mean, I know my healthcare costs go up every year. I know my water goes up every year. Has there been pushback on the auto increase, or is it just?
If it's only 2% and in this, looks like we should be okay.
Yeah.
We have problems in other services, specifically water and sewer.
The voters had our accounts for that 2% too.
Yeah, and it's it's part of the charter, so we just have to.
Okay.
So we don't. In the last number of years, there was like maybe there was 1 year or 2 years where we didn't do the 2%, something less. It's like
What? Why are we doing that?
yeah, they'll make that mistake. Because you can't make it up.
Yeah, you can't go back.
So it makes up for the year we gave 3%.
Yeah.
So.
All right.
Yeah. Excellent. So we'll move forward then. The methodology part of this 90-day notice, if that's what you guys want.
Yeah. Any opposition to the plan? Sean? Tim?
Just a clarification question. When we talk about the transfers, that's all coming from the rates we're charging.
Yep.
So there's no general fund money goes up that fund.
Oh.
Okay, then I'm good with it. That was where my question was coming from earlier. So thanks for the clarification.
Excellent.
Ray, Jim, Doug? I'm good.
I'm good.
All right. Thank you very much.
Excellent. So
Appreciate that, Doug.
when we bring the sanitary back, it'll be definitely a little bit different from this. You're going to see when it comes back, you'll see with a couple different options for commercial rates, separate from the residential. Just remember when we get there that we don't have a lot of commercial in town, so it makes a small difference, right? So it's not going to make a huge difference. We're still going to have problems. We're going to bring it back with a couple different options for the bonding part, and then also discuss the charter part. So just to give you a heads up on that. That's all we have tonight.
All right. Awesome.
Thanks, Deb.
You're welcome.
All right. The second topic we have is
Housing choices.
housing choice.
Beginning of the Joy Show.
Yes.
Yes, hi, all right. So I distributed hard copies to everyone here in regards to the questions that were raised by Mayor Mays and also Council President Rossner. So I'm not quite sure. Sylvia, were these emailed out to Councilor Garland? And
I'm right here, Joey. I'm sorry, was what?
was it mailed out or emailed out to the individuals that are not
Or
here?
what was what in
The one that I just handed out.
the document that you just handed?
Yeah,
I didn't email me.
okay.
I can
email it.
go.
Okay, so basically, here I am, it's like I'm turned over everywhere. So we did receive comments from Council President Rossner Friday morning. And so what I tried to do is definitely differentiate which ones were his comments in comparison to Mayor May's comments. And also within this memo identified like examples of shared courts. So Erica is emailing that to you, so give her about a minute to get upstairs and do that, and then we can definitely start, if you don't mind. I just want to make sure that everyone's on the same page, since all of you joining us virtually don't have that.
That's good.
With that extra time, cancel the other part of the work session
Yeah, we got
then.
one.
Yes. Yeah, and the goal for tonight is to really identify things that we can change with the proposed housing choices. And as a reminder for everyone, and also Josh has reminded me to let everyone know, remember the scope of what we're doing as far as House Bill 2001 and providing new housing choices. And we noticed in regards to that, those amendments, and also we are unfortunately also mandated to meet a timeline that that we have to implement something by June 30th, or else we would have to implement the model code, which is above and beyond what is what we are currently proposing, which is the minimum requirements as much as we can. So I got a thumbs up. Does that mean that you guys received it? Okay. All right. We got one person with a thumbs
Yes, I received it. Yeah. Keith.
Oh, okay, great. So with that, as far as considering those purview, we're just going to go through all of the questions raised so that I know exactly what needs to change. So then it'll make it easier for us. And what the ultimate goal is, tonight we are going to ask you guys to continue it to June 7th. Just because based on the conversation we might have today, there might be additional changes. And I just also want to highlight too that Thousand Friends and Fair Housing Council and Housing Land Advocates jointly provided a letter of support. And Sylvia did actually email that to everyone. But they're also asking to additional things. So that's something that we could discuss at the hearing later tonight.
Well, they submitted comments. If we want to bring it up,
Right,
council can bring it up.
right, exactly. But I just wanted to give you guys that. So let's just start at the very beginning. Yes, the housing ordinance can be effective June 30th. So that is definitely what the proposed ordinance language shows. So yay. The second question has to do with the definitions of alley. Are alleys allowed on multiple sides of a lot? And as defined, it doesn't prohibit an alley on multiple sides of a lot. The council, you can direct us to make amendments to the definition of an alley. But the additional comments from Councilor Rosner was that we should change this only to one side opposite the street with the highest use. So one of the key aspects of the question is this part of the scope of the housing choices? An alley has always been defined. So I know in the transportation system TSP amendments that we are actually proposing and having the first hearing tonight, which is not that part of the housing, but it's a separate. We're actually adopting the cross-section for an alley. And again, an alley has always been allowed within the code, but we've never codified it as far as the design standards. And that's what we are doing in the next ordinance that outside.
Great, so if we support Tim's idea, are you saying it's not appropriate in this ordinance? It'd be appropriate in the ordinance we're having the first hearing on tonight? Because
Yes,
one or the other.
yes,
So it'd be the second.
yes.
Okay.
And I think what Joy is going to allude to as we continue on is that there's going to be some things that that can be resolved with this project in this scope, there's gonna be some other things that you might say, we want it, but we really can't do it because it's not part of what we noticed and things like that. And so we sort of put into another pot to carry forward in the future, near future, hopefully. But so I think that's what she's getting at. And then this one is something that can be carried forward very soon.
Makes sense.
So if and when we have that conflict, we'll talk about that.
Okay.
Okay. Secondly, on the same question, and is an alley allowed in any land use? And under current language, the answer is yes. But I've been informed by both the city engineer that typically commercial and industrial sites are large enough to not warrant the internal public or not warrant internal public streets, meaning that typically these alleys aren't, they wouldn't propose them just because the sites are big enough. But again, you as council could propose amendments to restrict them to residential use only, land use only.
So my thought here was, especially given all the clever applications we've been getting around mixed use, that's where I'm worried about alleys coming into these areas. We had that. People are getting very clever about what's mixed use, right? So it's just a loophole. If we don't think it ever occurs because of the size of the land, then why wouldn't we just go ahead and prohibit it so we don't have someone clever down the road trying to do something we don't like?
I'm fine with that, but I don't think it belongs in this ordinance.
Yeah.
Would it belong in the second ordinance?
That's not for me to say. To me, this isn't like what saying alley, like if we say alleys are only allowed in residential, that will absolutely change nothing about this ordinance whatsoever. Because this ordinance is all about residential anyway. So
it sounds like you would support some kind of change here. And I would recommend that change go forward in an additional code cleanup this summer that takes a look at this issue, and the planning commission can weigh in, and then it comes back to city council as part of a second amendment package.
That's fine.
What would be the time frame for that again? I'm sorry.
We're looking, I would say this would probably come back to council. It could be late August, early September, given the notice requirements and having a conversation with planning commission.
So Josh, truly, this type of, it could not be covered if council wanted to on this ordinance or the transportation ordinance that we're looking at?
It's not within the scope of what was noticed. We could potentially renotice. I don't think we have time for that, probably with the 2001 measure. Potentially could do that with the TSP measure. I guess the other question, and kind of going to Erica's point, is this a big enough issue that you potentially want to go through the more typical process of having planning commission study it and make a recommendation and take public input and bring something forward to city council in that fashion?
For me, I think I wouldn't do that if it was the only thing. As a package of other potential changes to the TSP or other land use codes, then that would make sense to me.
Yeah, I'm sure we could think of a few things.
Yeah,
Well, I think there's some more in the document.
Yes.
All right.
Okay. Then there's a question in regards to the purpose of a shared court. The mayor has never seen it before. And so we basically, what I did do was provide examples of what a shared court looks like on the second page. And basically it's the areas that people park and shared the space. And I still remember when I was living, growing up in an apartment complex, this was the area where all the kids played, right? All the kids played, or the basketball hoop is there. that aspect of it. And of course, the residents typically are fully aware of that there's kids playing around here and that typically they're pretty careful in regards to watching out for
So,
those.
but in all three of these diagrams, this looks like parking lots to me.
Yeah, it is so one of the key things is that they could, as a developer, could put pavers down that are different to make the space not look so much like parking, just parking or driveway aspect of it.
But
So how is that
people would
different?
still park it.
Yes, it is.
So it's
Yeah, but so how is that different than
a
this?
parking lot.
Yeah, but how is that different from this circle and tree area in the middle? Isn't that a common?
That is our common courtyard or common green. That is our
No,
common
we're not calling
green.
it common green anymore. We're
No,
calling
no.
it common courtyard.
Common courtyard. Yeah.
Common,
Courtyard, so you're saying that a common courtyard and a shared court are two different things?
Yes.
yes.
That
yes.
feels confusing.
You wonder why I raised the point.
Yeah, but because frankly, as a kid, I would, if there was an area of either of those parking lots that didn't have parking spots on it, so really, this area over in this corner, I could see that as being potentially, a place where you could have a basketball court or something, you know what I mean? Like,
That's not a shared court.
yeah, but that's
You can't
like
park in it.
no,
Okay.
but that's just it, is that I don't want kids playing in a parking lot, period. I'd rather have them in a.
Which one of these
No, I know,
is
but-
shared court?
And the circles areas, the ones where there is parking, that
Those
is
are
the
all
shared
parking
court.
lots.
Right, so let me give you context in regards to why it's defined and where we find it.
Okay.
We actually put it as a design standard under entry location and orientation. And the way that the design guideline says, building elevations facing streets and shared courts should include pedestrian-oriented entrances. But we could definitely delete it.
Can you just say parking lot instead of shared court? If it's a design standard issue.
Well, they can change the code, whatever.
I just would get rid of any reference to shared court.
Okay,
Well, but hold on, do we get something from, like, does this meet some requirement of House Bill 2001 that we get by having shared court? in there?
no,
Oh.
it meets the standards that you,
Okay,
as far as design elements that was adopted last year, that called out if they happen to have a building elevation facing a shared court, they have to meet the entry and orientation requirements.
I like the entry orientation requirements.
Just don't like the term shared court.
Well,
We're trying to understand what it means, if like from a real tactical
So,
standpoint.
Joy,
how is this different than a parking lot?
so I guess, so if it said parking lot, would that trigger flags that they might say like, hey, you're requiring a parking lot? I'm
Like, what's the difference
I-
between shared court and a parking lot?
Well, I feel like we're setting up conflict, by calling it a shared court, because there's going to be people living there that say, hey, don't park here. My kids are playing basketball. I mean, I think we should just call it a parking lot.
If the developer wants to build an extra area that people can play basketball in that you can't park in, then the developer can do that. But I don't think we need to call it out in the code necessarily.
Okay.
Can I just briefly kind of expand a little bit on, I think it was Joy's point. The only way that this term is ever used in the code is in the requirements for pedestrian oriented or designed entrances, right?
Yeah.
And so the requirement in the code is that if you have an entrance that faces just a regular parking lot, that it doesn't have to be that style of entrance. But if it faced a shared court, meaning it's a space that is designed to be used also for pedestrian and bicycle type activities, in that case, it does require that type of entrance.
Can you read the specific language in that phrase in the code?
Yeah.
Building elevations facing streets and shared courts should include pedestrian-oriented entrances.
So this structure-
Special attention should be given to designing a primary building entrance that is both attractive and functional, primary entrances should incorporate changes in mass, surface, or finish to emphasize the entrance.
So you could strike the word shed courts and it would have exactly the same meaning otherwise.
No, well,
It's just where that type of entrance is required, right? So
Right.
if you
right, so do you, I mean, you don't think you strike shared court, you replace shared court with parking lot.
But then you're actually adding a requirement. And that's fine. Like it's saying, if you have an entrance that faces the parking lot, which means it doesn't face the public, you're also going to require heightened design standards. If that's what we want to do, that's fine. I don't know that I agree with it.
So let me also explain, see if I understand this. So if it's facing the shared court, then you're circling these things as examples of shared courts, but you're saying that if you're facing one of those, you need to have a pedestrian friendly entryway.
But then I think the developer would just argue, that's not a shared court, it's a parking lot. I don't have to do this design.
Yeah, but, and so I guess what I'm saying is, I don't even see on these examples, I see this one's a pedestrian friendly walkway maybe, or maybe this one's got walks. And so, I'm just trying to figure out what is different for pedestrian friendly. I don't see the pedestrian friendly.
I don't think those diagrams are an example of the kind of shared court.
Question, Joy and Erica, if a developer is doing a cottage cluster or cottage project where they're gonna have some sort of group parking, in the code, are they, as part of that, are they always a shared court in the definition, or are they also have the option of a parking lot?
Or park behind, I think we had some park.
Right, so the only place that shared court is even identified is under that design criteria. So a cottage cluster could not identify this as a shared court. They can identify it as the parking area or the driveway.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny, but, right.
So we just created a term that has no other place anywhere in the code.
Right, at this moment, right, nobody necessarily would put a development in with something that is required to be a shared court if it's a cottage cluster or trying to think, or.
Typically cottage clusters have the ability to also have like rear entry garages and stuff.
No garages.
No,
Or not-
a
rear entry
carport.
carport, sorry.
Right. So I think I'm theorizing here, but I think the intention of this language probably was that if you have areas where there tends to be more pedestrian type traffic rather than just vehicular traffic, that you want to have more attractive entrances to buildings in those areas. And the idea is to distinguish between this shared court and a parking lot, and that a parking lot is just someplace somebody pulls up and gets out of their car and gets into the building. A shared court is, there's going to be more pedestrian traffic, and so we want more attractive entrances there.
Another way you could go about it would be to say if the entrances face the public right of way, then you would require the additional.
And we do already have that language. It does, if it's facing a public street, it does still require a more attractive articulated entrance. And so I don't think that the idea with this definition is to allow something that wouldn't otherwise be allowed. It's to say if developers are building something that is more pedestrian oriented than a typical parking lot, that in those situations, we want more attractive entrances. It's to just make that distinction for the city's benefit in order to require that type of entrance.
But if it's not facing the public street, why do we care? Right? If so, the developer could build a parking lot and have an entrance to the cottage be off that parking lot and it doesn't face the public right away. Or instead they could have some pedestrian friendly hardscaping and softscaping in between the parking lot and the door, and now all of a sudden it requires an additional fancier entryway. Like, what public benefit is being served by that requirement?
Renee, what do you think?
I don't know.
It makes your head spin just a bit, doesn't it?
Yeah.
you know, generally these will be, it's envisioned that these will probably be smaller parking lots or parking areas.
Yes.
Need a whiteboard.
You know, so that there should be, you know, if there's no obligation, you know, at what point, how do you define if it's a, if you're just developer off the street, you're gonna build a cottage cluster, we're gonna do, you know, we got 10 acres and zone for cottage clusters. We're gonna put in our X number of units. We know we need to have a
Parking area?
A parking area. And then it's up to them to say if it's a parking lot or if it's a shared court.
I think there's a way to simplify this. We either need, forget the language for now, we either need to decide, do we want to require the entrances always meet this high standard regardless of what they face, or do we want them to require that only if they face the public? To me, that's the simple choice. Now, there's a third path, which is we develop some weird delineation between facing a parking spot, a lot, and facing something else internally, and in one of those cases, we want to require a higher standard for some bizarre reason.
No.
I don't want to, they're all gonna be these little cottages.
So the downside if we don't have this language is they can put in whatever they want and have them put however they want.
Not if it faces the public.
Because we have that understanding.
Yeah.
Right, if it faces the public road, it has to meet the higher standard. The question is, do we want to also have a higher standard in certain circumstances where it doesn't face the public road?
So can I just weigh in on that? My concern in that example or that question you just gave, if we have a higher standard because it's pedestrian friendly or they put a basketball hoop in or something like that, we're just going to discourage developers from doing that because they're not going to want to have to hit that higher standard to provide those amenities. So I wouldn't want to do that. I think that's a bad idea.
So I think if we go back to just removing the word, that one part of the phrase, then
If someone's building a parking lot, are they prohibited from making sure that it's pedestrian friendly or traffic calming or?
You shall not.
No.
do it.
You shall not do good.
Are they
Yeah.
prohibited from putting a basketball hoop in the parking lot?
If their CCNR says it, as far as not us. So.
Yeah.
From what I'm hearing is possibly eliminate the word.
I think it's gonna, if we're confused, imagine the developers in the community.
And remember, codes can change.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
And, yeah, worst case scenario, we end up with one really ugly parking lot that somebody figured out how to get in and we go, oh yeah, that's why we need to make it more pedestrian friendly. But again, I don't think that.
but that's not what this language is doing anyway.
No, I know, but that's what I'm saying, is I feel like that is such an edge case that I feel like codifying to eliminate it is more confusing than just dealing with it if it comes, right?
Yeah, I'm at the,
And we have the other.
I'm kind of on the, I'm leaning with Doug's idea of just saying, striking it, revisit it if we feel like we make a mistake.
That's one.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Hey, John, Sam?
Yeah, no, Kim, I think you summed it up best. I think if we have spent the last 15 minutes trying to figure out what this means, then it's troublesome. So I don't think I think we should try and simplify as possible.
And what's the intent behind it? Okay. All right, we can definitely make that change because it's tied to the housing. So we'll make that edit as far as part of the next amendment or with this amendment. So then in regards to the common green, we're deleting reference to common green and utilizing the word common courtyards instead for consistency. So yay. So edits were made. Yeah, sorry, Ron.
And Joy,
Yes.
Joy, just to complicate things a little further on the previous two questions, and my apologies in advance for that. I noticed just now when you went through and removed common green, I think that what you you should have done perhaps, or what we intended to do, was replace common green with common courtyard.
Yes, we did.
Right.
Yes.
I think generally you did that, but in the section that we were just talking about the pedestrian friendly entrances,
Okay.
it looks like it just got removed. And so the original language would have required those pedestrian friendly entrances also when they're facing the common courtyards.
Okay.
And so that's a question, I guess, for council is what we kind of came to on the previous discussion was only when it's facing a public street. But do you want it also for the common courtyards with the understanding that that's kind of a quasi public space
I would say
in a
yes.
cluster?
Yes.
Okay, great. We'll add common courtyard to 16 points. All right.
Good catch, Josh.
Sometimes it makes it easy.
Thank you. So we'll definitely make that edit in the table and include that. And then lot depth, there was a question if that was, is it a minimum, maximum? What was it? It wasn't cleared. So we are adding to the standard for lot depth minimum.
Okay.
So that
Is
edit.
that a change to the code or are we just clarifying it's?
It's just a clarification. Yeah. Then there was a question related to building
I
height.
couldn't imagine those being fixed, so.
So with the building height, we already have a standard on how we measure building height. And that's typically when the applicant submits a building permit and we typically, as the building technician, would review the height requirements to the standard that we have. And there's a definition related to grade.
I think all of this is out of the scope of.
It is,
2001.
right, but if anything, it was just for clarification because there was a question that was tied to it. So it is codified already on how we measure height.
Right, yeah, if I don't like it, we'll bring it up another day.
Okay, and then, so we're moving on to page 3.
That's me also.
So front yard setbacks. So the existing front yard setbacks for 3 zones, medium density residential, low, high, and high density residential, does have front yard setbacks of 14 feet and not 20.
That's current code?
Yes.
But that's for the building and not the garage. So the garage is set back 20 feet.
Okay, that's very.
Is that clear?
Yeah, so
I withdraw my comment because I thought that was the garage.
I'm good with the code as is then.
Yeah.
so the either here or later, what made me pop up in my mind is in the infill language, which it was reviewed, but this part wasn't talked about, allows even a further reduction in the setback, not the garage part, but the regular part, by like 4 or 5 feet. So in theory, with infill, you could have the front door 8 or 9 feet from the street.
Where's that at?
In the infill design, the infill
So
code language.
I would again say it's probably out of the scope of housing design choices. And I would welcome.
The infill design was part of, was given a review by staff. There's something in here about it.
Why would you be allowed to put the front door at 9 feet instead of the 14? Because the infill section of the code gives you additional leeway. Oh, does it?
Yeah.
Okay, but that's again, all existing code, right?
Yep.
So I'm happy to take on fixing it, I just don't think it's in the scope of this particular.
So you can here in one choice is leave it at 20 until we fix it in the other section, and then we go back to 14 or something, or say that. I think there's a creative way of doing it. Maybe Josh can chew on it with staff. I just don't, if we adopt this, I don't want an infill with a 8 or 9
But
foot.
we can do that already, like this has nothing to do with that. In our existing code.
This is
somebody
the,
can
this
already do
is,
that.
this is a part of our design standard for middle housing.
What I'm hearing staff say is our existing zoning already is at 14 feet. And the existing infill zoning already has an additional allowance. So that right now in our existing code, someone can already do what you're saying.
That is correct.
So,
And if this is something
add
that
it
you
to
would
the
like to
list,
change,
please.
yes, we can add it to the list.
Really,
You gotta
really
get
do
a
not
list,
have.
where's your list, Erica?
I'm making it. I'm checking it twice.
I agree with the mayor. Like, I think the whole section of code, of the land use code needs a review. Like, we need to go through everything
Yep.
and look at it all.
It's true.
You just say that you're not planning commission liaison.
It definitely needs an audit.
Okay, but for this topic, we're adding reviewing infill standards. Right, as far as
Yeah.
future.
Yes.
Future, yes.
Future.
Okay.
I'd say we're adding both reviewing infill standards, also reviewing the general lot setbacks, I think is what I'm hearing the mayor.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
You need to fix it in one or the other.
And I think part of the challenge, and I've talked with Erica and Joy about this, is that what you're referring to or what you're seeing is the product of iterative piecemeal code updates.
Yep. Right. Right.
Standards, and so.
And we don't always look at how one piece of the code interacts with another piece of the code.
Yep. And unfortunately, I went down that road that afternoon. As I was bouncing through the code book.
All right. Okay, so let's move on. So townhomes, there was a question in regards to the setback. So thank you for that question, Mayor Mays. So we are going to actually amend the table to reflect a setback of 5 feet and adding a footnote saying that there's no side yard setback between the detached homes because of course they're connected. Within the same townhome block. But after the block of townhomes, there will be a 5 yard setback requirement.
Yep.
Is there a reasonableness factor or in the code on how many units can be strung together?
Yes.
Six.
So after 6, you have to have a
Here's
gap.
another block.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep,
So you'd have to have at that point a 10-foot, you have to have a 5-foot setback on each of
yeah,
those 2 blocks, so you've got
Correct.
a total of 10 feet.
correct.
So now, in theory, people can get behind all of their buildings if they're good neighbors or something.
Yes.
Usually they're easy.
Well, not to mention if we have stormwater facilities running through those backyards too, the city might need access.
And we would make sure this is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I realize those have easements, people can still build fences on top of those easements and keep neighbors out if they so choose. Just when the city shows up, they have no choice to let us through.
All right.
Okay.
And then there is also perimeter screening standards. So if a commercial or industrial site is right next to a residential, there's perimeter screening requirements for that commercial or industrial development to make sure there's some type of buffer, landscape buffer to help with the transition. So then the next question has to do with the side yards as far as no HVAC equipment.
Joy, before you move on, can I ask a quick
yes.
question? Do we have any, and this is probably out of scope, but I want to ask it, do we have anything in the code where we have that interface between housing and commercial or whatever about building heights? Like for instance, we have a hotel that went in that's multiple stories and people on the top floor are staring right into the backyards of housing over there. Do we have anything that kind of creates a buffer in terms of building heights?
I don't believe.
I think we do. It's a, there's a step
So
back.
many feet, you can only be so high. and
Right.
Beyond that, you can be up to whatever the maximum height is.
There's a step
There is
back.
something, but.
In the
if we don't
commercial
review
and
it,
industrial, okay,
Okay. We don't have to go over it now. I was just curious. Thanks.
okay. All right, so as far as having HVAC equipment, meters, fireplaces and extending into the side yard setback, there are some exceptions as far as architectural features like eaves, cornices, canopies, and et cetera, can project up to 5 feet into the front or rear, requires yard
That's
setback,
current code.
right, and 2.5 into the required side yard setback. So that is currently existing code.
So we should just put that on the list of what to use, since it's not in the scope. I'm
Okay,
mainly just concerned that people have the 5 foot on the side of a property to get stuff in and out of.
okay. That is in the general category of setback review. Okay. So there was a question tied to 1.5 floors allowed for cottage clusters.
So what I reviewed before didn't have all of the language, I think, so
Okay,
I'm happy now.
okay, yeah, and I don't believe that there's, well, I should not say I don't believe. I believe that the language is clear enough so that there should be no loopholes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well said, Joey.
All right, page 4, asking about locations of fire hydrants, US postal facilities, as far as in relation to driveways and parking maximum. So one of the things that is on this omnibus ordinance that we are going to be putting forward to you guys in the fall will require parking plans to be submitted with the subdivision.
Music to my ears.
Yep. Yeah, so then the next question, why allow accessory structures in cottage clusters? If we agree, can we have them, and why the 400 square feet? So we do recognize that 400 square feet seems excessive since the building footprint of a cottage is less than 900. So 50 square feet has been recommended as far as for accessory structures. So
Like that.
I would propose no accessory structure.
Wait,
So-
hold on.
So let me just,
Square feet?
yeah, well, that's a shed. So there's a line that talks about there's a line that allows for 400 square feet for the carport.
Right.
And
Okay,
then there's another line that talks about accessory structures, and typically that's the shed, the tool shed.
okay, so here's where I'm envisioning it, because, so my in-laws live in one of these cottage communities in Utah, and when we go to visit, we stay in the guest room that is in the
That's a community
The
building,
community
that's not an accessory
Yeah.
building.
Right.
okay, that is
That's
not
separate.
this?
Yeah, that's a
Okay.
structure, yeah.
Okay,
That's
all
the
right,
community room.
okay, all right, I was gonna say, and like, that's the whole point of,
No, when I saw,
Yeah.
right, when I saw 400 square feet, I'm saying, oh, that's an ADU.
No,
Okay.
accessory structure as in like a tool shed.
tool shed or something.
So,
Okay, all right.
yeah, and the reason I recommended 50 square feet, or it could even be less.
But they could have their sporting equipment in there,
Yeah, there,
if it's a young.
But all the yards are common yards in these cottage clusters.
Right, but what could you
you can put a
could put a lot of,
floating,
you
you
could
can
put a
put
lot of.
volleyball.
So can I jump in, guys?
Nope, there's advantages to be in person.
Hey,
Somebody mute him.
yeah, so serious.
Tammy,
Yeah, I think we need to allow for storage sheds. I mean, I know if my mother lived in one of those, she's going to want a garden and do flowering and all kinds of stuff, and they're going to want a little place to put their tools and their hose and and all those different gardening and outdoor stuff shed. And I think not allowing a shed is bizarre.
Yeah,
flower pots.
isn't it all common space outside of your building?
So I have the idea of up to 50 foot
Okay,
tool shed
Seems reasonable.
seems reasonable.
Yes. 50 square feet.
but what about
Is that per unit, 50 square feet per cottage?
Carports are given.
yeah,
Okay, carports are, okay.
yeah, carport's already
Okay,
allocated
good.
400, so.
Accessory structure is different than an ADU.
Yes.
Right,
Yes.
that's
And
accessory
ADUs would
dwelling.
not be allowed in cottage.
Right,
Correct.
Even by
Right.
state laws, ADU rules and all that.
No.
right.
As was pointed out to me, ADUs are about single family detached
Yes,
homes
Yes.
on one lot.
yes.
That's, yeah, that's, okay, excellent. Okay, so I
You
heard,
beat me in the head a couple times, Erica, I'll figure it out.
okay, so we got 50 square feet. I will make that change. Okay, then.
Did I also hear 1 per unit was the desired Is there any sort of limit on the number of these accessory structures?
If it's one per.
Maximum of one per unit, yeah.
Thank you, Josh, for that. Okay, great. So the next was comments that I made in error. So as far as setbacks, so I've already eliminated it from the red line version.
Awesome.
Then the next question.
It was a shot,
Okay. So we'll move on.
I think so, unless somebody else.
Question for another day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want that on to have it part of the discussion?
Right.
The PUD said, I'm guessing there.
I don't think my language to add, I don't believe is legal.
But there might be a discussion to be had around getting after the gist of what you're getting.
Yeah.
All right.
Put it on some list.
I apologize. What question was that?
We'll take a look.
My PUD shot across the bow,
Without requiring an approval.
like the council could just say no without a reason.
Oh, is there, so my only comment on that on the language was, can we make sure the language in there when we talk about community benefit is not just limited to that PUD, that the community benefit has to be for the larger community?
I think we can, but it's not part of this
Yeah,
ordinance.
so
Right.
on the talking list of,
Points, take back. We'll take a look at that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
and we already talked about that the accessory dwelling unit thing.
Right. And then the next question has to do with manufactured homes. So they are currently not required to meet the residential design standards because they have their own siding requirements that's under the chapter 16.46 manufactured homes.
I think that needs to be reviewed and essentially brought in line with the residential design standards.
Especially since
Or subchapter of it.
Mhm.
well, it is, especially in light that Salem last session tried to get a bill through that would allow manufacturing homes in any zoned area. So that's an area we want to.
And I'm not against manufactured homes in any residential neighborhood. I think they can do some really nice ones.
Some of them look very nice.
Okay.
I was gonna say, is a manufactured home, I mean, we've got a definition of that, but I know that there's like hybrid ones where it's like, hey, we've manufactured all your trusses and all your, and we're gonna bring your whole walls put out here all in one thing. And so do we have to worry about?
I think it's a valued conversation with that whole chapter, just because there are these different housing types.
Yep. We have it on the list to review.
And just one point of clarification, Councilor Rosner, I'm not sure if this is the bill you were talking about, but the bill in the 22 legislative session that requires cities to allow manufactured homes in all residential zones, that passed.
Oh, great. Now
So it is an opportune time to look at the question of design for manufactured homes.
The reason they did that, Bill, was because of the challenges they had with replacing homes after fires. And but they made it too broad. So I didn't realize that passed. So yes, we do need to look at that.
Josh, can you check on the effective date of that bill? If it's January 1 or July 1?
Of next year.
Yeah.
It took effect upon passage.
Oh,
Oh,
great.
okay.
All right, well, let's make sure we get that to the top of
Okay.
the list.
Right. All right.
All right.
Must be an emergency.
All right.
Emergency meetings now too? No, I think that's what Salem declared an emergency in order to make it effective immediately.
Okay, so the last item on page 4 deals with parking space sizes. And again, we're looking at that parking plan that's going to be required. So that will help implement that.
Thank you.
So then, starting on page 5, there was lots of questions as far as public alleys, pedestrian, shared open space or shared pathways. Again, all cottage developments are required to abut a public alley. There's no question, or a public street, sorry, there's no question about that. That each individual lots within a cottage is not necessarily required to abut a public street, but instead they can build to abut a private street, shared open space or shared pathway.
So as long as there is a sidewalk or paved pathway from the public street to every unit, then I'm good.
Yeah, and there is that required interconnectedness pedestrian pathway that connects each cottage to any sidewalk in the abutting public right of way.
If they string together multiple clusters and not all of those clusters are on the main street, I don't care. As long as someone can walk from the main street.
Yeah, that is a requirement.
There's probably ADA compliance, right? So, yeah, there's no stairs, there's no, yeah.
Well,
Not within the development, no. It's only in the public sidewalk space, would it be?
right,
Interesting.
remember that there was testimony asking for us to look at ADA standards, and we said that was something that we need to reevaluate. So that's also on the list.
If we're trying to, again, attract age in
Somebody stop
place.
putting things on my list.
If we're trying to attract age in place, I mean, we've got to be mindful of.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
I think going down that road as part of this ordinance would be very hard.
Okay.
Yeah, it's out of
Just
the,
put it on,
yeah.
yeah, Erica likes to keep her list right, so.
yeah, it's out of the scope of
Okay.
this. Okay, so,
So have we answered these questions then?
yeah, and there was a question as far as the half.
You got that covered with that
Okay,
added language.
great.
The draft didn't do it, but the
Okay,
additional text.
right, and then the next.
are-
And then the top of page 6, we talk about infill. We already know what we're doing with infill standards, is we'll be reviewing them.
Yeah,
In
as
the
I said, I
future.
reviewed it, just maybe,
It's been,
yeah.
Right, and then the very last question has to do with private streets and can we prohibit them?
and they want our direction.
Well, so the only example I know of that came up in front of the planning commission was in the Denali, where there wasn't enough room for what we would consider a regular public street, but they needed to have access, and so we put a private street in there.
Oh, yeah. So Denali is a planned unit development.
Yeah.
It's a PUD, and so PUD allows our city engineer the flexibility to allow for private streets. And typically, private streets are only allowed for 2 lots or less.
Yeah, I think that was for 2 homes.
And we have a second right alleyway on the Cedar Brook, off of Cedar Brook Way, on the backside.
But this is
That
a
was done
private
under,
street.
that was done under PUD as well, and that is private.
Okay,
We don't
so,
have a lot of private
so
streets.
do we want to add this to a future
Generally,
discussion?
the argument for why you don't want private streets is that, and this is just.
Yeah.
Generally, then the public that lives on these private streets don't realize that they're on private streets and then want the city, like it
To
just
fix
kind
them, to fix up on
of
them.
fix things, and so it's more of a.
But are we gonna tie his hands if we say, okay, no more private streets, and then all of a sudden?
So let's have it on the list of discussion.
I think.
It's outside the scope of this.
I think that if they're gonna
I
ask
truly don't like
me
private
whether
streets.
or not
It's a big discussion to have.
I can provide design standards that will give that private street at least the same conditioning that we would assume for our residential streets, which is a 25-year design life. I can do that, but it's still under their maintenance.
Yeah.
The only thing that I have a problem with is not the alleyway and, the configuration of that can be private, but it's the storm drainage. And how that all works into it. I wouldn't allow any public utilities down a private street at all.
No, never.
So what was in this current
But we
ordinance
have-
that brought this
So we
question
have
up?
Pine Street on the other side of Sunset is
But
private.
that's that
Mayor,
is old stuff. Anything from what we're dealing with from here on, that's what we try and do is to avoid that as much as possible.
Yeah, which is
Mayor.
why
What was in this current ordinance that brought this concern up?
Oh, my just memory of the topic.
Oh, okay.
I was on a roll. So
All
it's not
right.
applicable here. It's back to the list.
Erica's list, gotcha.
Very good
Yeah, and
memory.
by the way, I think I'm with you. Because we have these anomalies where it's gonna make it difficult, because frankly, if my neighbors came to me in 20 years and said, hey, we gotta repave this thing in 5 years, we've gotta start coughing up money.
So who's gonna show up at the city council? They're all gonna be.
Yeah, it's gonna be a nightmare, right? And so frankly, we're just asking for trouble, but I also, there's gotta be maybe if by including the alleyway option.
Years ago, the only thing that I knew would get blessed through the whatever process, I remember I was on PC or was, other than a PUD, and maybe the code isn't in there now, but at one point the code was, okay, you can build a private street, but it had to be the same standard as the city street. And then no developer was wanting to do the private street because they got no benefit, and then if they were developing maybe for their own home, they would have to turn around and fork out cash and maintain it.
Yeah.
So they never did it.
My brother lives on a private street, and I think there's 5 or 6 houses, and they just gravel the road. But every 2 or 3 years, they need to re-gravel, but they got 3 neighbors who don't want to pony up to gravel.
Yeah, it feels like we're gonna cause a fight.
I'm gonna vote yeah.
Yeah.
Public alleys probably,
Yeah.
but have total control of the design aspect of it.
Yeah. I like that better.
And maintenance.
And the maintenance of it, but
Right, how do you sweep it? How do you deal with the storm drains, cleaning up storm drains?
Yeah.
When do you slurry seal it? When do you crack seal it? When does it have to be full rebuild?
Out of your Craigslist.
Yes,
This was super
that's-
helpful, Troy. Appreciate this.
Yeah,
Great.
very good.
So wonderful. So just as a heads up, as far as next steps, I am going to ask for you guys to continue it to June 7th. Josh, do you want to bring up the timing aspect as far as on June 7th?
Has to be an emergency.
I won't be here.
Oh.
Yes, it'll have to be unanimous and an emergency.
Even if somebody's gone, or just unanimous of those who are in
As long as we have a
attendance?
quorum, it's unanimous of who's there.
I'm going to verify right now. I believe it's unanimous of all consular positions. That's why we've had some people call in from China before for a similar reason.
I don't know, I might be, I'm in a convention.
Well, we would just put it on the agenda at the time you had 5 minutes to walk out
So
and
I
make the
have
phone
to
call.
see, Houston, how much?
2 hours.
2 hours.
I just confirmed it's all positions that are filled on council.
I might be able to.
Okay, I stand corrected.
Okay, so let's just say if it's,
If for some reason it's impossible for you to do it that day, we'll pick another day and have a special meeting.
And we
We'll
can
continue
just
to do a
do
special
it, we
meeting.
can just do a special meeting.
Is that in the charter or is that a council rule?
Charter.
However,
so Josh, do you also want to give them the other option if, to have it effective 30 days?
I was gonna say. there's probably
No.
a reason.
No, okay.
Because by state law, we have to,
Yes, so if it
there
wasn't
would be
July
a few
1st,
days of
correct.
code.
What
that could
if?
Cause a problem.
Okay,
Yeah.
All right.
No, let's not do that.
okay.
We'll, if need be, we'll have a special meeting.
Oh, wait, if we go
When are
June
you-
7th, can't we then do the one after, the June 21st?
The state actually wants some time to chew on whatever we pass, so it'd be better, maybe,
The Tuesday.
We do a proxy?
the Tuesday after, or we could continue this to a special meeting next week. We can do it, a meeting, the night of how many days are you in Houston?
I get back here on the night, or no, wait a minute. Sorry, I'll be back on that Thursday, whatever that Thursday
That's
is,
the night.
the 10th. Okay, yeah.
The day before.
No,
the
the
weekend.
cruising's the 18th.
I know, they forget they changed the weekend. Okay, well, let's have
I
to
mean,
meet out.
if it's, so the 7 o'clock here is going to be
9 o'clock.
9 o'clock there. Chances are I could step away at that point because I should be done with the session.
At night? Yeah, hopefully there's nothing that late.
Well, we're probably ending up right about that time.
So
So I
if
should be
we
able to
start,
step
if we start
away.
at 7, we don't get to anything till 7:30.
Yeah, so I should be able to call, I could probably call it enough to do
The vote.
that.
Okay, we'll plan on that. If need be, we'll continue it again, if we can't have all 7.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds great.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Joy.
you.
Thanks, folks.
That was the 2 items for work session. We've got 9 minutes. Shall we take a break and
Yep.
convene outside? Thank you. We're adjourned to the work session.
I have a question.
Talking about.
Do I need to list?